Revan stood in the heart of the Star Forge, surrounded by crackling energy, its dark power coursing through every fiber of his being. He felt the living tide of the Force bending around him in a vortex of seething potential, a tempest fueled by hatred, cunning, and the infinite resources of this ancient Rakatan creation. The lights of countless distant stars glowed through the massive windows as the structure continued its relentless production of Sith warships. His cloak, blacker than the space beyond, draped around him like a coronation robe. At that moment, amid the noise of forging fleets and distant klaxons, he thought of the choice that had led him here. Once, long ago, there had been a spark of doubt in him, a sense that perhaps this path he walked was not fated, that there had been an alternative, a road to redemption. But that spark had been extinguished the moment he refused to turn back. With a slow, measured step, he ascended a small flight of stairs leading to the Star Forge's central dais, a swirl of shadows crowning him in malevolent glory. The Jedi strike team that had come to stop him lay broken, their lightsabers scattered across the floor. Revan looked upon them with neither glee nor sorrow, only a singular certainty that they had erred in opposing him. Bastila Shan had come to him, tried to draw him back to the light, but her pleas had fallen upon a heart that no longer recognized mercy. He would not be redeemed. The Jedi had tried to wipe his mind, to shape him into some hero of their own making, but they had made a fatal error. They had underestimated the invincible will that once commanded armies across the galaxy. The Star Forge hummed in accord with Revan's resolution. He had never truly let the light overshadow his thirst for power. At most, he had to feign allegiance while his memory was incomplete. Yet the memory of his own mastery, the truth of his identity, had slowly returned. And the moment that truth emerged in his mind, the illusions of redemption fell away like a broken mask, revealing the Dark Lord once more in all his terrible majesty. He knelt beside Bastila as she lay unconscious, her breath weak but steady. Her Jedi robes were tattered from the duel, her once bright face marred by grief and exhaustion. Revan gazed upon her with a trace of lingering curiosity. There was a flicker in her presence that might have evoked compassion, had his heart still been open to such sentiments. Instead, he touched her forehead lightly, probing her mind with the Force, seeking any threads of knowledge that might be useful. Flickers of the council of the Jedi's strategies danced before him. He could have broken her mind entirely, yet he pulled back just enough to leave her alive. In that moment, even as he reaffirmed his rejection of the light, he decided that Bastila Shan still had some uses, if not as a direct ally, then as a pawn. With one final command, he ordered the Star Forge's security droids to retrieve her, taking her to a guarded medical bay for potential interrogation later. She was too valuable to discard. He could sense in her a fierce connection to the Force, the tenuous echoes of a bond she still felt for him, the man she believed he could become. Perhaps it amused him to keep her close, or perhaps he saw future possibilities in turning her to the dark side. However fleeting the notion, Bastila's presence remained a tool to be exploited. His focus then shifted to the greater galaxy. In refusing redemption, he had effectively shattered the Jedi's last hope of containing the threat he posed. He sensed them reeling, scattered, uncertain of the path forward. The Sith Empire, reignited under his command, now held the means to finalize its conquest. Revan turned toward the swirling energies in the Star Forge's core, where blazing embers of processed matter were transmuted into fresh armadas. He sensed Malak's lingering essence, an echo of the former apprentice he had struck down to reclaim command of the Empire. Malak's arrogance had led him to believe he could surpass Revan, but the moment of truth had demonstrated otherwise. The wound of betrayal had been repaid 100-fold, ensuring that no one would stand in Revan's path again. Fleets poured from the Star Forge in unprecedented numbers, fueling a tide of war that stretched from the outer rim to the core worlds. Word spread like wildfire. Revan, no longer the returning hero of the Republic, was the unrepentant Dark Lord of the Sith once more, and he led an empire that seemed unstoppable. The battered Republic, still recuperating from the devastating Mandalorian wars, strained to muster fleets capable of resisting him. But the combined might of the Star Forge and Revan's strategic genius created an impenetrable wall of aggression. The galaxy, from remote trade routes to major star systems, felt the reverberations of doom. On Dantooine, the Jedi enclave lay in ruin. The planet's gently swaying grasslands were scorched by Sith bombardment. Survivors among the Jedi fled in all directions, taking with them only the most precious artifacts and holocrons that could be salvaged. The Council, what little remained of it, convened on hidden satellites, in remote corners of the galaxy, in some desperate attempt to reorganize. But each time they met, the conversation circled back to a single pivot. How could they possibly counter Revan's intellect and the nigh-limitless resources of the Star Forge? Their attempts to sway him from within, to rekindle any spark of goodness, had failed. The weapon they had once thought would save them, turning Revan into an agent of the light, had become a blade at their own throats. Meanwhile, the Sith armies marched into system after system, crushing local resistance with brutal efficiency. The fleets carried disciplined legions of troopers, dark adepts trained in secret enclaves, and an ever-growing variety of droids that seemed to be churned out without end. Each time a planet fell, Revan cemented his control by installing a governor loyal to him alone. He promised stability, order, and power to local rulers so long as they knelt in obedience. Some populations submitted out of fear or pragmatism, while others resisted, hoping the Republic might come to their aid. But by then, the Republic's forces were on the verge of collapse. Supply lines, communication networks, and key trade routes were disrupted as the Sith seized hyperspace lanes with methodical precision. The galaxy was being strangled, and hope dwindled with each passing day. Taris, though once devastated during Malak's purge, was gradually rebuilt to serve as a crucial strategic outpost for the Sith. Towers rose once more over the sprawling cityscape, except now they bore crimson banners depicting Revan's sigil, a stylized icon that replaced the traditional Republic crest. Citizens of Taris lived in constant tension, uncertain whether new bombardments would come if any fraction of resistance manifested. The gloom became the new normal, policed by Sith patrols in black armor. Curfews were enforced harshly, and any mention of Jedi salvation was enough to earn the wrath of the Imperial overseers. Across the galaxy, similar scenes unfurled. Even the legendary planet of Manaean, so proud of its neutrality and Kolto supply, found itself coerced into compliance. Revan's envoys, accompanied by a fleet in orbit, arrived under the guise of negotiation, but left with concessions that effectively turned the Selkith government into a vassal. Through manipulation of commerce and the threat of unstoppable assault, Revan's domain grew ever larger. The Jedi, scurrying from hideout to hideout, attempted to warn these worlds of the danger of making deals with the Sith Empire, but fear and desperation had a way of subduing moral stands. Yet Revan did not rest on military might alone. He understood that a conqueror could only hold territory by controlling hearts and minds as well. Propaganda poured through the HoloNet, proclaiming the dawn of a new era of security and strength under his leadership. Everywhere, voices spoke of how the decadent Republic had led the galaxy to war and chaos, from the Mandalorian Wars to the countless pirate raids that plagued hyperspace. The new regime, so the messages went, would bring lasting order. Former Republic citizens who had once revered Revan as a war hero found themselves tempted to shift allegiances. After all, if Revan had saved them from Mandalorian conquest, perhaps it was better to submit now, to avoid being on the losing side of history. At times, Revan himself appeared in carefully orchestrated holo-broadcasts, his face concealed behind a distinctive mask, black and angular, reminiscent of his earlier persona. He spoke in measured tones, promising an empire built on discipline, efficiency, and a singular vision. He rarely raised his voice. It was the quiet, self-assured authority of one who needed no theatrics to prove his power. These broadcasts were sporadic but deeply impactful, turning Revan into a mythic figure in the eyes of many. The mask, once a symbol of the hidden identity stolen from him by the Jedi, now stood as an emblem of unwavering resolve. Even the remnants of the Mandalorians, scattered after their defeat in the Mandalorian Wars, felt the pull of Revan's might. Some clans, resentful of the Republic's victory over them, saw an opportunity in the new Sith Empire. They recalled that Revan had been the one to outsmart Mandalore, had shown cunning and ruthlessness in defeating them. For many Mandalorians, there was an odd respect for this Dark Lord, and thus a handful of clans swore fealty to him, offering their warriors in exchange for the chance to fight under a leader they deemed worthy. Revan accepted them, ensuring that their martial prowess was directed toward enforcement of the Empire's will, from smothering rebellions to hunting down Jedi enclaves. The war escalated swiftly. The mid-rim systems one by one switched allegiances or fell under Sith control. The fighting was savage, each conquered planet leaving fewer resources for the Republic to regroup. Survivors spoke of entire cities laid to waste, while refugees fled toward the inner rim or the core, only to find those once safe havens bracing for conflict of their own. Millions were displaced, and across the galaxy, an undercurrent of resignation took hold. The unstoppable wave of the Sith Empire continued unabated. At the edge of Revan's territory, within a deep space station that had once served as a covert Jedi outpost, a small group of knights and masters convened. The chamber was dim, the lights turned low to conceal their presence from any patrolling Sith vessels that might happen upon them. Fear hung in the air, but so did determination. These were among the few who refused to simply run. They still believed or wanted to believe that Revan could be stopped. Master Vima, a wizened Jedi known for her expertise in battle meditation, led the discussion. Their intelligence suggested Revan was preparing to strike the core worlds, possibly with a direct assault on Coruscant, the heart of the crumbling Republic. If Coruscant fell, the rest of the galaxy would kneel. They had precious few options. They spoke of a covert mission to sabotage the Star Forge, but the possibility of infiltration was slim. Its defenses had been bolstered significantly since the times when Revan and his companions had once approached it for entirely different purposes. Now, an entire sector fleet ringed the structure, and Revan himself commanded from its central spine. Some suggested a desperate attempt at a peace treaty, or a parley to open negotiations, but none truly believed Revan would offer them anything more than subjugation. Others argued that a chosen one might exist, a prophecy that still lingered in old archives, describing someone who would bring balance to the Force. But these were faint hopes at best, and the pragmatic voices insisted that prophecy alone would not avert the immediate cataclysm. As they deliberated, a tremor in the Force rippled through them. Revan had arrived at another stronghold, this time the planet Onderon, and the dark side flared in a horrifying crescendo. Some master felt the extinguishing of hundreds of lives in an instant. Revan was demonstrating his power once again, crushing opposition with minimal mercy. The Jedi in the station shuddered, though none spoke of retreat. They were too few, too disorganized, and the light seemed ever distant. Yet, if the Jedi disbanded entirely, they would never reclaim their hold in the galaxy. They had to stand in some capacity, no matter how hopeless the struggle. The stage was set for the largest assault yet, Coruscant itself. In the sprawling city planet that served as the political and cultural nexus of the Republic, frantic evacuations had begun for those who could afford it. Senators, wealthy merchants, and the privileged classes fled to unknown corners of space or bribed their way into the safety of neutral worlds. The Senate, long the seat of power, had grown impotent with fear. Many politicians clamored to find a last-ditch negotiation with Revan, but they could not even agree on what terms to propose. Meanwhile, the few remaining admirals and generals scrambled to cobble together a defensive force from the battered remnants of the Republic Navy. Millions of soldiers and volunteers took up arms, hoping to defend the planet from the impending Sith onslaught. The skies above Coruscant were thick with hastily deployed warships, forming a desperate blockade. Planetary ion cannons, turbolasers, and the Golan defense platforms readied for the battle. Civilians streamed into underground shelters, entire districts sealed off for protection. It was a last stand in every sense of the word, for if Coruscant fell, the Republic's seat of governance would be obliterated, and any unified resistance would collapse swiftly thereafter. Then, the Sith fleets appeared at the edges of the system, led by Revan's flagship, the Leviathan reborn in an even more formidable incarnation. its hull brimming with advanced weaponry and a complement of Sith warriors. Next to it were the countless cruisers and carriers churned out by the Star Forge, each brandishing the ominous black insignia. The jump into real space was accompanied by the immediate dissolution of local hyperspace beacons, as Revan's forces jammed communications and took control of the sector's space lanes. What followed was perhaps the largest space battle in galactic history up to that point. The battered Republic defenders clashed with the Sith Armada in a frenzied assault. Starfighters weaved through corvettes and capital ships, unleashing volleys of laser fire. Proton torpedoes streaked across the blackness of space, lighting up the void with momentary flashes of brilliance before they slammed into targets. The Sith fighters, sleek and numerous, overwhelmed squadron after squadron of Republic craft. Despite some valiant maneuvers by a few veteran pilots, the defenders were pushed back. One by one, the Golan defense platforms were hammered into scorched rubble floating in orbit. The Leviathan's main batteries obliterated entire frigates with single salvos of turbolaser fire. On the surface, Coruscant's skyline shimmered with flickering lights, the sense of dread palpable in every district. The wind howled across high-rise platforms and dark alleys. Civilians took shelter or tried to flee, but soon realized there was nowhere to go. The Republic High Command, nested in the old Senate Hall, hurriedly coordinated the defense, dispatching ground troops and planetary fighters in a last, desperate bid. The force assembled would have been imposing in a typical scenario, but not against the relentless tide commanded by Revan. Amid the chaos in orbit, a disturbance in the Force caught the attention of every Force-sensitive being on the planet. Revan's presence was unmistakable, a swirling maelstrom of darkness that overshadowed any meager luminosity the Jedi could muster. Moments later, Sith landing craft pierced the atmosphere in droves. They descended upon strategic sectors, the government district, the temple district, and the military fortifications. Squadrons of Sith troopers, each well-trained and fanatically loyal, deployed in formation. Dark Jedi led spearhead assaults, their crimson lightsabers carving through defenders. Some of these dark adepts were Bastila's former peers in the Jedi Order, once coerced or seduced by Revan's dominating will. Others were new acolytes, raised in secret academies on Korriban or Dromund Kaas, taught to worship Revan as the ultimate master of the Force. Coruscant's streets became a war zone, with blaster fire lighting the night. The Sith advanced methodically, using intimidation as well as force to break any lines. Civilians who dared to interfere were trampled. Skyscrapers collapsed under artillery fire, turning entire sectors into rubble-strewn battlegrounds. Still, pockets of resistance fought on valiantly, from hardened Republic shock troopers to local militias. But they were hopelessly outmatched. Revan arrived at the Senate Hall aboard a sleek shuttle, guarded by an honor guard of black-armored troopers and a cadre of dark Jedi. He walked with purpose through the burning cityscape, stepping over debris and past the bodies of those who had defended the planet's leadership center. Inside, the once majestic corridors echoed with the moans of the wounded and the hiss of fires burning in corners. The great rotunda was shattered, the statues of past chancellors cracked and blackened. Smoke curled from the gaping holes in the ceiling. As Revan made his way to the central podium where senators once debated legislation, surviving Republic dignitaries cowered. Some tried to plead for mercy, others stared in numb defiance. He offered them a single ultimatum: unconditional surrender. When one trembling senator dared to question his legitimacy, Revan extended an open palm and sent the man crashing into the far wall with a telekinetic thrust, leaving him broken and silent. An officer tried to raise a blaster, only to find Revan's blade ignited in a brilliant snap hiss, slashing through the weapon and the officer's torso in a single fluid motion. A hush fell over the onlookers. None dared speak. They knew now that negotiation was but a fiction. While the Senate Hall lay in ruin across the city, the Jedi Temple, too, was under siege. The remaining Jedi defenders, from Padawans to Masters, mounted a desperate stand. Lightsabers of blue, green, and yellow clashed with red. Blaster bolts ricocheted off deflecting blades. Shouts and cries echoed in the once hallowed halls, overshadowed by the roar of collapsing pillars. Statues of ancient Jedi cracked under bombardment. The archives, once so meticulously maintained, were threatened by fire and sabotage. Some Jedi, determined not to let centuries of knowledge fall into Sith hands, scrambled to secure holocrons, loading them into small transports or trying to hide them in secret vaults. But the enemy was swift, cutting off escape routes. Amidst the fray, Master Vandar, one of the few surviving members of the Council, crossed sabers with a dark Jedi in the temple courtyard. Rain poured down from the sky, sizzling against lightsaber blades. Vandar's small stature belied his formidable skill, and for a moment, it seemed like he might hold the line. But the dark Jedi he faced was merely a harbinger of the power that approached. Revan himself strode onto the temple grounds, flanked by black-armored troopers. He dismissed the lesser conflict with a subtle wave of his hand, forcing the dark Jedi aside. Revan and Vandar locked gazes. The Jedi Master spoke in a trembling but determined voice, imploring Revan to turn away from this madness, if not for the Jedi's sake, then for the countless lives threatened by his ambition. Revan's only reply was the igniting of his crimson blade. Their duel was swift but extraordinary. Master Vandar, small but agile, danced around Revan's strikes, seeking to find a gap in the Dark Lord's defenses. The courtyard's marble floors cracked under the force of their parries, shattered by the energy colliding between them. But the power of the Star Forge coursed through Revan, amplifying his strength, fueling his hatred with every swing. In the final moments, Revan disarmed Vandar, sending the Master's lightsaber spinning across the courtyard, only to slice cleanly through the Jedi's torso. With that, one of the last pillars of Jedi leadership fell, and Revan surveyed the courtyard in silent triumph. Throughout the night, the Sith proceeded to systematically crush all remaining resistance in the city. By dawn, or what passed for dawn amid the planet's perpetual skyline, the fires of battle had subsided to smoking ruins. Surviving Republic leaders were rounded up, placed under arrest, or executed on the spot if they were deemed too dangerous. Ordinary citizens awoke to an oppressive hush, broken only by the distant hum of Sith patrols. In a single, devastating blow, Revan had seized the galaxy's capital world, forcing the entire Republic to bow. Coruscant, once the proud center of galactic governance, had become the black throne of Sith power. In the weeks that followed, Revan installed new governing bodies on Coruscant. Some senators, eager to protect their interests, pledged loyalty to him and became administrators of this new Sith dominion. The ancient Jedi temple was stripped of its relics, its spires repurposed to house a new generation of Sith teachings. Construction crews, under the watchful eye of Sith overseers, began to reshape the temple's architecture, replacing Jedi iconography with more brutal, angular designs. Revan allowed certain civic functions to continue to maintain the planet's infrastructure. But the people knew that everything they did was now at the whim of a ruler who saw them as a resource to be managed. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the last remnants of the Jedi scattered even further. Some found refuge in uncharted systems, others tried to disguise themselves among civilian populations. Whispers spoke of secret enclaves hidden in the unknown regions, while a few knights endeavored to gather the seeds of future rebellion. Yet Revan's shadow was vast, and the Sith intelligence network grew more efficient by the day. Imperial agents lurked in starports, on backwater colonies, ever vigilant for signs of Jedi infiltration. Public opinion was carefully molded. People were encouraged to report any suspicious activity in exchange for favors. Slowly, a climate of paranoia settled on the galaxy, reminiscent of the darkest days of the Mandalorian threat. Only now the oppressor wore the face of Revan. Despite the fear, pockets of resistance did indeed emerge. On distant worlds such as Onderon, Kashyyyk, and planets near Hutt space, local cells formed clandestine alliances to undermine Sith rule. They staged small-scale attacks on supply lines, rescued political prisoners, or sheltered Jedi fugitives. In some cases, entire populations rose up in revolt, though these rebellions were inevitably put down with brutal swiftness. Revan did not hesitate to use fear as a weapon. If a planet's inhabitants dared to rebel, he ordered a demonstration, sometimes reducing a major city to rubble through orbital bombardment, then offering a chance at compliance thereafter. It was a grim ultimatum, yet it worked. Most worlds, seeing the carnage inflicted on those who resisted, chose subjugation over annihilation. Within a year of Coruscant's fall, the Sith Empire's borders stretched to nearly every part of the known galaxy. Some holdouts still existed, such as the Hutts on Nal Huda and the Wookiees on Kashyyyk, but they posed little organized threat. The galaxy's primary institutions were under Sith oversight. Even the popular HoloNet entertainment channels were censored or co-opted to serve as vehicles for Imperial propaganda. Members of Revan's inner circle, including Darth Bandon, a dark apprentice who had pledged loyalty soon after Malak's demise, and a cadre of ambitious Sith lords, jockeyed for influence. But Revan held them all in check with an iron hand, ensuring that none could amass enough power to challenge him. The memory of Malak's betrayal was never far from his mind. He had learned well that absolute power could invite treachery if he did not suppress any possibility of dissent. Bastila, meanwhile, existed in a state of limbo under Revan's watch. He had kept her alive, even ensuring that her injuries from their last battle were treated. She was confined to a regal prison of sorts, a tower on Coruscant from which she could watch the destruction her former ally had wrought. Dark side practitioners continually visited her, attempting to twist her will, to break her spirit, or to seduce her into embracing the darkness. At times, Revan himself appeared to question her, though he rarely spoke more than a few sentences. Bastila's unique skill in battle meditation, if turned fully to the dark side, could be an unparalleled asset. She resisted, clinging to a faint hope that Revan still had some shred of goodness buried within him. She tried to reach him, reminding him of their past bond, of the feats of heroism they had once accomplished together. But each time, she was met with a cold glare, a mind fortified against any sentiment but dominion. Over time, Bastila's resolve became a battleground in its own right. The seeds of despair grew in her, and at moments, she felt her loyalty to the light waver in the face of cosmic hopelessness. Occasionally, Revan would reflect on the notion of destiny. He recalled how the Jedi Council had once manipulated his mind, attempting to reshape him into their champion against the Sith menace he himself had set in motion. The irony was thick. That champion had returned to lead the Sith far more effectively than Malak ever could. If the Force had a plan, it was now overshadowed by Revan's will. He saw the Force less as a cosmic guide and more as a tool, one he intended to master fully. In that respect, he studied the holocrons seized from the Jedi Temple, sifting through ancient knowledge, picking out secrets to empower his empire further. He sought not immortality, at least not yet, but a perfection of control, a total understanding of the dark side that would extinguish any threat of rebellion or infiltration from the light. Years passed, and the galaxy adapted to life under Revan's rule. Coruscant became a grand fortress, the skyline dominated by towering spires that projected Sith might. Public gatherings took the form of forced celebrations of Revan's victories. The population was mandated to attend parades that showcased newly forged weapons of war, or to watch the triumphant marches of Sith battalions. Statues of Revan in his iconic mask sprouted in major squares. Children in schools were taught that Revan had saved the galaxy from the corruption of the Republic, from the hypocrisy of the Jedi who always claimed moral authority but failed to protect the common citizen. The rewriting of history was swift, thorough, and relentless. The Jedi, though nearly extinct, still influenced pockets of resistance. Rumors spread of a hidden enclave on Tython, or perhaps in the ruins of Dantooine, or on some undiscovered moon in the Outer Rim. Every once in a while, a minor victory against the Empire sparked hope. A sabotage operation that destroyed a Sith factory, or the rescue of political prisoners from a detention center. But these were fleeting accomplishments, overshadowed by the unstoppable apparatus of Revan's government. Sith intelligence learned quickly, adopting more draconian security measures each time an incident occurred. On Korriban, the ancient tombs of the Sith grew bustling with activity as new acolytes, hungry for power, explored the crypts of dead lords. Red-bladed weapons clashed during training sessions, and the only law that prevailed was survival of the fittest. In dark chambers illuminated by firelight, incantations from the old Sith tongues echoed, forging a new generation of zealots who worshipped Revan as the pinnacle of their lineage. Yet behind their fervor, seeds of ambition stirred. The nature of the dark side was treacherous, and not all who pledged loyalty did so with pure intentions. Some dreamt of surpassing Revan. However, the memory of Malak's downfall loomed, and Revan's name commanded fear. None dared move openly against him. During the 7th year of Revan's empire, a subdued hush blanketed much of the galaxy. The empire seemed secure, unassailable. People went about their daily lives under the constant shadow of Sith tyranny, some having long forgotten the ideals of the old republic. The factories of the Starforge continued their production of warships and weapons, though much of the galaxy had already been conquered. Revan's designs turned inward, focusing on consolidating power, stamping out the last vestiges of rebellion, and continuing his study of ancient knowledge to harness the dark side in ever more potent ways. It was around this time that a peculiar ripple in the Force began to manifest, distant, faint, but perceptible to those who still listened. Small pockets of light, far-flung in the cosmos, seemed to glow a bit brighter. A prophecy from ancient times, whispered among those few surviving Jedi, spoke of a champion of balance who would arise from the ashes to challenge a great darkness. Some believed it was mere myth. Others clung to it as the last hope. Revan, for his part, sensed something shifting but could not pinpoint the source. He dismissed it as no immediate concern. After all, who could pose a threat to him now? In his fortress on Coruscant, Revan continued to test Bastila's loyalties. She had resisted the allure of the dark side for years, even as her conditions slowly deteriorated. She had become gaunt, her spirit weary from constant mental battles. One day, Revan visited her personally in her tower cell, accompanied only by 2 silent black-robed attendants. Bastila peered up at him, her once lustrous hair hanging limply around her face. He asked her again to join him to embrace the Empire. As always, she refused, but her eyes, once alight with conviction, now betrayed a hint of trembling uncertainty. Sensing this, Revan pressed harder. He reminded her of the futility of the Jedi's cause, of the blood spilled in a war they could not win. He dangled the notion that with her talents in battle meditation, they could push the boundaries of the Empire even further, perhaps even beyond the known galaxy. He said that, together, they could uncover secrets of the Force locked away by the vanished infinite empire of the Rakata, that they could transcend the limitations of mortal existence. Bastila closed her eyes, steeling herself. Revan's voice was hypnotic, and the tower cell felt suffocating. Her connection to the light flickered under the weight of despair. And in that precarious moment, doubt gnawed at her. Perhaps the galaxy truly was doomed. Perhaps the only path to survival was to align with power. But she forced the thought away, remembering the simple principle upon which the Jedi stood. No matter how dark the horizon, the light could still endure. With the last vestige of her will, she spat a refusal, swearing that she would never become his slave, no matter what the cost. Revan observed her for a moment, his face unreadable behind the mask, and then simply turned and left. The door hissed shut, leaving Bastila alone with her trembling faith. Bastila's unwavering stance was not without consequence. Revan's patience for her defiance dwindled, and he instructed the Sith overseers to intensify their methods. Now they employed illusions, torture devices augmented by the dark side, and forced mind probes. She was subjected to horrifying visions, illusions of a galaxy made perfect under Revan's rule, illusions of Jedi kneeling to him, illusions of her own complicity in the atrocities committed. Each session chipped away at her mental fortitude, and it was only a matter of time before something inside her broke, or so the Sith believed. Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim, rumors of a hidden Jedi enclave persisted. One such enclave, tucked away on the remote world of Ambria, focused on preserving the traditions of the Order. They had few resources, but they had hope, which was more valuable than any armada. Its members included a few scattered knights, some Padawans discovered in secret, and even older masters who had survived the purge by feigning death or living on the run for years. They honed their connection to the light in underground caverns, forging new lightsabers from crystals found in hidden caves. It was a fragile sanctuary, always at risk of discovery by the Sith, who combed through every sector of the galaxy. In this enclave, a fiery young Padawan named Senya displayed remarkable aptitude and an uncanny connection to the Force. She had grown up hearing tales of Revan's turn to darkness and had lost her family when the Sith overran their homeworld. Her sense of justice burned hot, and she harbored a thirst for vengeance. Yet the masters at the Enclave cautioned her that vengeance was the path to the dark side. Instead, she was told to cultivate discipline, compassion, and the determination to restore balance. Senya meditated daily on the Force, grappling with her anger and heartbreak. In time, she showed glimpses of a power the masters could not fully explain. Whispers circulated. Was she the champion prophesied to challenge Revan? Though the Enclave on Ambria remained undiscovered for now, Revan had dispatched dozens of spies and inquisitors to track down any sign of Jedi. Sith scouts roamed the Outer Rim, scanning life forms on uncharted worlds. One particular Darksider named Darth Ziraz, ambitious and methodical, gained a reputation for rooting out hidden Force sensitives. Ziraz gleaned intelligence from captured refugees, employed brutal interrogation tactics, and scoured ancient star maps for any clue that might hint at Jedi activity. Those who aided him were rewarded with status and wealth in the Empire. Those who hindered him vanished without a trace. Eventually, a lead emerged. Ziraz captured a smuggler who frequented the Ambria system, suspecting the man of running supplies to the rebels. Under severe duress, the smuggler confessed that he had transported individuals with laser swords to a remote outpost on Ambria. Sensing a goldmine of opportunity, Ziraz relayed this information to Revan's intelligence network. Soon, a plan was in motion to dispatch a strike force to Ambria. The chance to eradicate a significant portion of the remaining Jedi was too tantalizing to pass up. On Coruscant, Revan pored over star charts verifying the data. He had always known that the Jedi would try to hide and regroup. The time had come to extinguish their flame once and for all. Revan assigned a fleet to Ziraz, along with several powerful dark Jedi, instructing them to show no mercy. Before the ships departed, Revan made it clear that he would not tolerate failure. The dark side seemed to surge in the briefing chamber as he delivered his commands, and every Sith present could sense the enormity of the operation. They left with the grim determination of those who believed they were on the cusp of securing absolute power for their master. Word reached the Enclave through sympathetic informants. The Jedi realized their time was short. They could attempt to flee, but relocation carried enormous risks, and they had nowhere safer to go. Some urged scattering individually across the galaxy, making it harder for the Sith to track them all. Others argued to stand and fight, to make one last attempt at forging a bastion of light. In the end, they chose a middle path. The young and vulnerable would escape, taking the knowledge of the Jedi with them, while the more capable masters and knights would remain to buy time. Senya, though still a Padawan, insisted on staying. She believed that she was destined to confront the darkness that was Revan's empire. Reluctantly, her teacher allowed it. When the Sith fleet arrived in the Ambria system, the Jedi defenders were already in position, concealed among rocky outcroppings near the main approach to the Enclave. The planet's dusty landscape provided some natural cover, but it offered little else in the way of strategic advantage. As the Sith dropships descended, the Jedi triggered hit-and-run tactics, using the Force to create illusions of larger forces and ambushing small Sith squads. For a time, it seemed like they might hold back the invaders. But more dropships came, disgorging wave after wave of troopers and dark Jedi. Ziraz led them personally, a tall figure shrouded in black robes, his eyes glowing with malevolence. He had no intention of letting the Jedi slip away. The battle was fierce, the air charged with blasts of Force energy. Lightsabers clashed in the narrow canyons. Jedi Knights fought valiantly, some sacrificing themselves so their companions could slip away. Others were cut down as they tried to protect the escape of children and Padawans. Yet even in the face of overwhelming odds, they persisted. The presence of the light flared brilliantly, if briefly, in that barren terrain. Senya found herself cornered by a squad of Sith troopers and a pair of dark Jedi. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she drew upon the Force, recalling her training. With a swift arc of her blade, she deflected incoming blaster fire. The desert wind stung her eyes as she channeled her focus. She could sense the fear in the troopers, the hatred in the dark Jedi. She moved swiftly, stepping into a flurry of saber strikes that disarmed her enemies. One dark Jedi tried to seize her with Force lightning, but she summoned a protective barrier of light, reflecting some of the energy back at him. He fell, howling in pain. For an instant, triumph sparked in her chest, until Darth Sidious himself appeared, scything through the battlefield. Sidious wasted no time, lunging at Senya with a double-bladed crimson saber. She reeled, barely parrying in time. Their blades locked, sizzling in the midday heat. Sidious pressed in, using raw strength and dark side power to corner Senya. She struggled to maintain her footing in the sandy terrain. Sensing her fear, Sidious unleashed a burst of telekinetic force, slamming her against a nearby rock formation. Pain shot through her side and her vision blurred. The Dark Lord advanced, savoring the moment, intending to kill her. Yet something stirred within Senya. A calm serenity overcame her fear, and she centered herself in the light. Her blade ignited anew, and she managed to intercept the killing blow. Sparks flew, and for a heartbeat, their gazes locked. Sidious seemed momentarily surprised by her resilience. He grinned malevolently and Elsewhere on the battlefield, the Enclave Masters fought desperately. Some died in the first waves, others fell back, luring the Sith deeper into the canyon to spring traps. Despite their valor, the Sith numbers were too great. One by one, Jedi defenders were brought down. The last transport carrying the youngest initiates blasted off into the sky, slipping past the orbital blockade only by the sacrifice of the few starfighter pilots the Enclave possessed. Their sacrifice would allow the next generation a chance to live. For now, Senya and Sidious continued their duel, each strike ringing out across the rocky gorge. Sidious used the Force to hurl debris, forcing Senya to dodge or deflect in a frantic dance. She returned with a series of nimble strikes, trying to probe for a weakness in his style. Yet each time she thought she had an opening, Sidious countered, showing skill that surpassed her own. He was toying with her, certain of his impending victory. She felt her arms grow heavy, her lungs burn. Then, in a final clash, Sidious twisted his blade and caught Senya's hilt with the tip of his own. Her lightsaber spun from her grasp. She tried to summon it back to her hand, but Sidious delivered a sharp blow with the Force, knocking her off balance again. He leveled his saber at her heart. His voice dripped with contempt. Pathetic. Did you truly think a mere Padawan could stand against the might of the Sith? There is no future for your kind, only oblivion. Senya, trembling, watched the blade aimed at her. She mustered the last of her defiance, summoning the Force in a desperate attempt to shield herself. She wondered if this was the end, if the prophecy was merely a false hope. But in the split second before Sidious could deliver the final strike, a sudden wave of light blossomed in Senya's core, an intensity she had never before experienced. It felt as though the Force itself coalesced around her, raw and powerful. She extended her hand. The wave erupted outward, catching Sidious off guard and throwing him back, his double-bladed saber spinning out of his hand. For an instant, time seemed to slow. Senya inhaled deeply, stepping forward, and reclaimed her lightsaber through the Force. She ignited it in a brilliant flourish. Sidious, recovering, launched a bolt of lightning at her. But Senya's newly awakened power absorbed it with a scintillating barrier of energy. She lunged, and in a single arc that Sidious could not anticipate, she sliced through his torso. The Dark Lord's eyes widened in shock. He collapsed to the ground, the life draining from him, disbelieving that a mere Padawan had managed to defeat him. Senya stood over him, gasping for breath, her mind reeling at what had just happened. She had barely survived, and the cost was immense. Around her, the Enclave lay in ruins, Many Jedi had perished, and the survivors were scattered or captured. She wondered if she had tapped into some deeper well of power that might yet corrupt her. Such was the risk when one called upon strong emotion, but it had saved her life. The victory was hollow. The Sith rampaged across the Enclave, destroying buildings, capturing or killing anyone left. Senya had no choice but to flee, to vanish into Ambria's caves, uncertain if any other Jedi had survived. She carried with her the painful knowledge that the Jedi were almost entirely broken. Yet a tiny spark of hope lingered. She had glimpsed a deeper potential within herself, a power guided by the light. Perhaps there was still a chance to challenge Revan, though every sign indicated it would be an almost impossible feat. That night, as fires burned in the distance, Senya tended to her wounds in a hidden cave. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her, and tears blurred her vision. The faces of fallen friends and mentors haunted her. She could almost hear them urging her onward, telling her that the Jedi way was not gone, that she must endure. Outside, the Sith patrolled, searching for stragglers. She kept her presence masked, clinging to the Force to hide her signature. In this crucible of despair, she made a solemn vow. She would not stop until Revan's tyranny was ended. Across the galaxy, Revan sensed the outcome of the battle through the Force. He felt an odd disturbance, a flicker of something that did not align with the total annihilation of the Jedi that he had hoped for. He dismissed it as inconsequential at first, believing that a mere survivor or two posed no threat. Still, a prick of disquiet nagged at his mind. Perhaps it was the memory of his own unexpected survival after the Jedi had tried to destroy him. Small events could sometimes lead to cataclysmic changes. He turned his focus back to the consolidation of his empire. Soon, a grand ceremony was held in the old Senate Plaza on Coruscant, where Revan publicly declared the final dissolution of the Republic and the birth of the Galactic Sith Empire. Countless regiments of black-armored troopers stood at attention, their weapons gleaming under artificial lights. War banners adorned every building. Statues of Revan overlooked the crowd, and enormous displays projected his masked visage. The broadcast was sent throughout the galaxy, the image of the masked Dark Lord addressing trillions of beings in dozens of star systems. Revan's voice, deep and resonant, cut through the quiet hush. He spoke of inevitability, of a new age of order that would sweep away the chaos of the old. He promised prosperity for those who cooperated, destruction for those who defied. The words echoed through the Force, as if the dark side lent power to his pronouncement. A slow, rhythmic applause erupted from the throngs of assembled spectators, some forced, some genuine, all overshadowed by fear. In that moment, a galaxy away, Senya listened to the broadcast from a stolen comm device in the solitude of a dilapidated safe house on another world she had fled to. She felt her blood run cold at the final, formal unveiling of Revan's empire. Yet she also felt a new resolve crystallize within her. The era of the Republic, as she had known it, was over. The Jedi Order was no more than a few scattered souls. Darkness reigned triumphant. But as she turned off the broadcast, she clung to the lingering spark of the Force, letting it guide her next steps. She had survived the onslaught. Somehow, she believed that survival meant her life had a purpose. The next day, Revan sat upon a throne fashioned from black metal and obsidian in the newly repurposed Jedi Temple on Coruscant. He stared at the cityscape through a massive window, his thoughts as fathomless as the space beyond. The entire galaxy now lay at his feet. Billions cowered at the mere mention of his name. He had harnessed the Star Forge's nearly infinite production capacity to build a military unmatched in recorded history. The Jedi were effectively extinct, the Republic dismantled, and no power remained that could challenge him. Yet the horizon did not bring him satisfaction. As he gazed over Coruscant, he recalled the arcs of his life. From adventurous Jedi Knight leading armies against the Mandalorians, to conqueror forging a new empire, to brainwashed hero, and now to unrepentant Dark Lord. Each transformation had shaped him, but he had learned the lesson time and again. To rely on no one but himself, to trust only power. The future lay before him like a blank canvas. He could push beyond the known galaxy, search for secrets in unexplored regions, perhaps even seek out rumors of the true Sith, or delve into the mysteries of life and death itself. Every boundary, every limit might be shattered under his will. No, he thought he was not done. This was merely the beginning of a grander design. The engine of conquest would not rest, nor would his study of the Force. He would shape the galaxy into a monument to his vision, forging a golden age of Sith dominion that would last for millennia. If any threat emerged, he would crush it. If any Jedi survived, he would root them out. If any new power arose, he would subsume or annihilate it. He closed his eyes, letting the dark side flow through him, fueling the cold certainty at the core of his being. And so, under Revan's iron rule, the galaxy trembled. World after world offered tribute. Trade routes carried goods to feed the war machine, and in turn, scraps of prosperity trickled down to the compliant. The Grand Star Forge hovered in its remote sector, an unholy furnace forging the nightmares of tomorrow. From the outer rim to the deep core, the star systems were overshadowed by a singular will, the will of the Dark Lord who had never been redeemed. Yet the Force, vast and enigmatic, was not so easily snuffed out. Hidden in some distant corner, an ember of the light awaited its moment, a quiet vow that one day, the cycle of darkness would break, and a new hope would rise to challenge the greatest tyranny the galaxy had ever known.